proving that plasma winds electrically scoured the Earth, built mountains, and carved canyons, is a tall order in the face of more than a century of consensus science saying otherwise. In prior times, electric universe theories might have been readily accepted since religions and mythologies explicitly state the gods of creation were storms, lightning, and thunder. Modern science, however, came along and discounted the myths and religions as useless for understanding nature. Scientists said ancient myths expressed superstitious anxieties of people ignorant of cause and effect. They displaced any notions about cycles of catastrophe by insisting geology is an exceedingly slow process of change, due primarily to chemistry and erosion. They didn't prove it, by the way, they just insisted that time itself is the proof. Billions of years, so who can argue with that? And except for the chemistry, which is the work of electricity, they excluded any role for Earth's or the solar system's electric circuitry in their causes and effects. The electric universe view is that the Earth, Sun, solar system, and in fact, the entire universe, is a composition of connected electric circuits, and electricity is the cause of all the effects. The weather did actually shape the land, much as mythologies say, during highly kinetic plasma storms. The landscape is electrically carved, and the mountains are wind-blown dunes. Our theories have evidence. They present cause and effect mechanisms that make perfect sense in terms of classical physics. The evidence and the mechanisms comport with what can be seen with the naked eye, and some of the theories have been confirmed by experiment. To show how our theories explain a mountain much different than the consensus, a comparison is in order. The consensus analysis is this Myron Cook video examining the Sheep Mountain anticline in Wyoming. With the title, Explain This, he presents a challenge. I'll take it. You can compare his explanations to mine and determine which fits best. Cook's video covers classic geological theory that I will provide an alternate electric universe explanation for. What I hope this will show is that plasma orogeny is a theory of verifiable simplicity, elegance, and classic physics, whereas the consensus requires a narrative built of dogmas and unverified assumptions. I mean no offense to Myron Cook. He knows what he's been taught. He authentically believes the theories of his predecessors are confirmed by his own observations. Unfortunately, his predecessors were wrong, and he suffers confirmation bias because if one squints hard enough, 1,000,000 years of erosion can be imagined to do almost anything. I chose his video because I think it is excellent. He communicates his knowledge in plain language and explains technical concepts without hubris or condescension. He obviously loves nature and is curious and enthusiastic. He presents excellent footage of the mountains, much better imagery than I can provide, and I really like him. Maybe he'll see this article and become curious about the electric universe. I'm linking his video because it allows a convenient comparison of particular features and explanations. He gives a textbook explanation most mainstream geologists would substantially agree with. I hope you enjoy his video, as I did, and give him a thumbs up, and please, only positive comments. The triangular shape and planar face of the fins, or flatirons, that Myron talks about were made by sonic shockwaves. That is why they appear as repeating harmonic forms. What you will notice in several examples we'll look at later is that flatirons and related mountain features are shaped like shockwaves, down to the finest detail. However, before looking at the finer detail, higher fidelity understanding will be achieved starting with a broader contextual view. Sheep Mountain anticline is a dune raised beneath a giant updrafting wind that fed an even larger plasma storm system. The swirling patterns of topography immediately surrounding the anticline tell the story. These patterns were literally blowtorched into the earth by downbursting plasma winds from the same storm system that made Sheep Mountain. Figure 3 is annotated to highlight points of discussion. Sheep Mountain is the snail track shaped mountain outlined by a rust-colored layer of earth sitting center left in the image. If you're reading this, you can expand the images to examine the intricate patterns closely, and please note the following. Area 1 directly above Sheep Mountain shows a slightly oval crater pattern. Area 2 shows almost two co-joined oval craters. Both of these features are surrounded by a pattern of hills and dales that looks like a figure 8 racetrack. The figure 8 pattern mates with the contours of Sheep Mountain perfectly, as if they were molded together. Area 3 below Sheep Mountain has a more paisley pattern of craters, but these are oriented with their axis lengthwise almost perpendicular to the mountain. Plasma storm systems capable of producing the same wind forms at ground level are found on Jupiter, at a much larger scale, of course, but in the same fractal paisley patterns that created Sheep Mountain and many other similar mountains found around the world. In Figure 4 is an image of a storm system on Jupiter that is very close to the pattern of storm that made Sheep Mountain. Again, it is annotated to compare with the areas noted in Figure 3. Area 1 on Jupiter clearly shows a hook-shaped indicative of a tornadic rotation. Area 2 appears to have two counter-rotating cyclones. They are embedded in a storm cloud shaped like a figure 8, in an identical configuration to the figure 8 racetrack by Sheep Mountain. There is even a squared-off shelf cloud on Jupiter configured precisely like the squared-off top of the racetrack. Below the white figure 8 cloud are paisley-shaped storms in Area 3, oriented exactly like the Paisley craters in Wyoming. Between these is a linear bar of angry-looking clouds. This is the updrafting inflow wind to the giant thunderstorm, where dusty plasma winds reached supersonic speeds as they lifted into the storm, leaving a pile of dust behind, removed from the wind electrostatically to form Sheep Mountain and its fins. Where Sheep Mountain formed is indicated by the green bar annotation. Chevron shapes appear in the clouds where the inflow occurs. At least that is what a similar storm did in Earth's formative years when cold, dusty plasma engulfed the planet. What is taking place beneath the storms on Jupiter is hard to say, since we can't see the surface. I will only say this: it's not what NASA tells us. Why, one should ask, would the tops of the clouds on Jupiter or anywhere else tell anything about the ground below? Well, it's because the most electrically charged, fast-moving winds are vertical winds in updrafts and downbursts. This is true on Earth and on Jupiter. So what you see looking at the top of Jupiter's clouds are primarily the tops of towering updraft columns and cyclonic downdrafts. Just like mesocyclones and cyclones on Earth are built around central updraft and downdraft columns. The updrafts are building mountains. As the wind lifts from horizontal to vertical flow, it accelerates, creating a shockwave. Dusty plasma wind passing through the shockwave releases its dust electrostatically and deposits it into a region behind the shockwave called the separation bubble. The storm is creating the same effect that airburst nuclear detonations cause, an explosively fast updraft that draws a supersonic ground wind in its suction. Harmonic shockwaves form at the inflow to the updraft where the wind deflects and accelerates upward. This has even been simulated by airburst models. Flat irons are found in almost every mountain range on Earth. They can be limestone, sandstone, or granite. They can be sedimentary or metamorphic or igneous. They can form an entire tetrahedral mountain, a harmonic series like an anticline, or flat irons on a mountain flank, and they will perfectly match the shape of shockwaves. That's one hell of a coincidence. How random seismic forces and erosion create such geometric perfection without leaving everything crumbled is a mystery, because geologists can't make this happen in a lab. They can shake, tumble, stretch, and squeeze earth and rock all day long, or even a billion years, and they will only make a pile of rubble. Erosion softens edges. It doesn't make them sharp and straight. They can never form tetrahedrons of such crystalline form because these are products of creation, not destruction. However, engineers do it in wind tunnels all the time. When a supersonic wind hits a surface, it deflects, accelerating the wind, creating a shockwave. Behind the shockwave, in the boundary layer beneath the fast-moving wind, a compressed, dead air space is created called a separation bubble. The shape of the separation bubble, under ideal conditions, is a perfect tetrahedron. Analogous to an ocean wave forced to rise, curl, and break onto a beach, its shape is defined by Fibonacci. When a supersonic wind is forced to rise, curl, and break, its shape is defined by Pythagoras. One can see the flat triangular face of such tetrahedrons on iron meteors. Because they entered the Earth's atmosphere at supersonic speeds and began to melt from the heat, shock waves sheared across the meteor's surface as it tumbled through the atmosphere and left triangular shapes of molten iron in the separation bubbles. These are flat irons, or fins, created by shock waves, and they are identical in shape and proportion to those on the flanks of the mountain, shown in Figure 10. It is not coincidence that this meteor in Figure 10 has triangles on it. Every iron meteor develops shockwave separation bubbles as they ablate at supersonic speeds, falling through the atmosphere. Here's several more in Figure 11. How wind shaped flat irons on the mountain is no different than the flat irons on meteors. High-speed wind pushed material into triangular pockets of still air shaped by shock waves. How the wind makes a mountain in the wake of a supersonic shock wave is no different than making sand dunes. Sand fills in slow-moving compression waves that form pockets of still air that faster wind rides over. The mountains are different only in that the wind was supersonic, so the bumps were sharply defined tetrahedrons, and the wind was dusty plasma, not just sand. Proof is the harmonic repetition of forms found in both sand dunes and mountains, because they are both produced by sonic pressure waves. Erosion doesn't harmonize. Erosion is entirely dependent on a watershed being available to collect adequate rain to erode things below the watershed. What you see in the mountains are impossibly eroded peaks, box canyons, and repeating geometric shapes that have no watershed above them to begin the erosion process. Geologists invented something called mass wasting, which means the parts of the mountain they can't explain just disappear, presumably sand grain by sand grain over millions of years. They don't know where it disappears to, or what carries it away, or how it magically produces repeating harmonic forms. They cannot demonstrate it happening by any means. It's the geologist's version of dark matter. They say things to explain it, like nature rhymes, that don't explain anything, but sound very eloquent. A cold, dusty plasma differs from a plasma of noble gases used in electronics and neon signs. It is not fully ionized and has dust, sand, or even rock entrained that is not ionic, but carries a surface charge. Surface charge on the dust polarizes to align with the electric field, so the dust drifts like a charged particle with the plasma. It is cold because the bulk temperature of the plasma is reduced by the non-ionic matter. Cold, dusty plasma is not well understood. The entrainment of matter makes it more like a foam than an atmosphere. Particles of dust suspend like bubbles of foam, buoyed by electromagnetic forces. When those particles come in proximity to a surface of opposite charge, they stick electrostatically. That is how a plasma wind deposits a mountain, because it blows over land that has been electrically charged, either from the ground below or from lightning above. Shock waves act as waveguides for lightning, which charges the land in their shadow. The limestone Cheat Mountain is composed of was sucked out of a sea somewhere else and blown to Wyoming by the wind. Different materials blew in before and after, sandwiching the limestone between. Byron notes it is fine-grained. It is most likely the water, fish, fossils, and all were lifted from a seabed by subsurface electrical discharge and delivered as an electrified slug of limestone mud by plasma winds. Existing subsea canyons are the remnants of those events. They are the deepest places on Earth, and as usual, a mystery to consensus science. If triangular flatirons and tetrahedral mountains were the only similarity to shock waves, that could be called coincidence. But there are complex details that are precisely replicated. Figure 14a shows a ring of mountains in Pakistan similar to those near Sheep Mountain. They are patterned with harmonic tetrahedral fins and another feature particular to supersonic shock waves called a Prandtl-Meyer expansion fan. A wind tunnel image of an expansion fan is also shown in Figure 14b. Erosion creating an expansion fan is beyond coincidence. All of the features in this mountain, its boot print shape, its fins, the linear hills that make the expansion fan, the crater and shockwave blasted rim, are exactly shaped and positioned as they should be if caused by a supersonic downburst wind. It isn't a one-time anomaly either. Figure 15 is a comparison of the crater in Pakistan with another in Mexico, halfway around the world. Downdrafts blast these types of craters like a plasma blowtorch. This one also has a rim the shape of a boot print lined with tetrahedral fins and an expansion fan of linear hills, also with fins on the windward side. The crater in Mexico indicates a clockwise rotation, and the Pakistan crater is counterclockwise. Also shown is a storm on Jupiter with the same boot print shape and the dark eye of a hurricane in the center, rotating clockwise, which is shown for comparison. The thin, white rim of clouds shaped in a hook are formed by updrafts, while the dark cyclone in the center is the blowtorch. The expansion fan is in the cloud, sweeping gracefully off image to the left. The parallel rows of linear hills and expansion fans are made like the Figure 8 racetrack next to Sheep Mountain. The wind blew perpendicular to the rows of hills and dales beneath higher altitude up and down drafts, creating an interference pattern of high and low pressures on the ground. The narrow, linear, parallel hills are pressure ridges, where wind speed was slowed and dust deposited, while low pressure, fast-moving air swept the lanes between. Updrafts and downdrafts are convection currents, but they aren't only thermal currents. They are driven by the planet's electric field. In a plasma storm, there are heavy charge concentrations in the clouds, inducting charge concentrations on the ground below, and in the layers of aerosols and dust that lay over the ground, amplifying the electric field. Condensate is a charge carrier. Where there are clouds, there is higher charge density and a stronger electric field. Dust and aerosols carrying a positive charge are lifted by the electric field, generating updrafts. Paragliders and hang gliders know this as cloud suck. It's extremely dangerous because it can trap them in a cloud and even lift them into a thunderstorm. The ground charge must reflect the sky and vice versa because of capacitance. Look at Figure 16. It's as if the pattern of striated clouds were a mold that was pressed to the ground to create the racetrack. Electricity makes the pattern, and wind does the rest, molding the pattern of dust being deposited the same way it molds the cloud condensation, by voltage. As above, so below. The explanation is capacitance. It is capacitance between earth and sky that causes lightning and tornadoes in the first place, as both are examples of coaxial currents generated by capacitance. This is simple physics that can and has been reproduced in tabletop experiments. It's the electric field and its constant feedback with magnetic field that twists plasma winds into electric currents that segregate into vertical jet streams that create incredible boot prints, figure eights, horseshoes, paisley patterns in Jupiter's clouds, and the matching fractal shapes on Earth. Updrafts leave sedimentary deposits behind, as charged dust is electrostatically precipitated by shock waves, which act as lightning rods. The sudden compression and expansion of a shock wave causes ionization and the formation of a double layer, making the shock wave a plasma conduit. The shock wave touches ground at the separation bubble, making it the charged hotspot where the dust collects anodically, layer upon layer in the exact shape of the pressure ridges and shock waves formed by the wind. Figure 17 shows a textbook diagram of a feature called the lambda foot, with some examples found in nature. It is a compression wave created at the boundary layer contact between shock wave and its reflection. It causes a sudden step shift in pressure regimes between the incident shock wave and its reflection, which can clearly be seen where the sediments are offset. They're difficult to find as they're usually embedded into the base of mountains, but there are clear examples found at road cuts and cliff faces. Consensus geologists call these slip faults, as if the ground just fell into this vertical slot. They are not faults at all and have nothing to do with tectonics. They are 100% caused by shock waves. Most telling is in the difference between the center image labeled laminar flow and the right image labeled turbulent flow. Turbulent flow happens in fluids, not in solid rock. Each layer of sediment was plasma-borne dust, carried in the wind, segregated into step voltage regimes in harmony with pressure regimes, stacked vertically by capacitance. Higher pressure means higher density, means higher dielectric effect in an electric field. Plasma-layered wind followed the voltage and pressure profile as it carried charged dust into the lambda foot. That dust suspended like bubbles in a foam, electrostatically connected with the ground, and adhered in the exact same profile as the wind that carried it. Another shock wave feature easy to find in nature is a hole in the center of tetrahedral fins. Figure 18 shows a flat iron in Comb Ridge, Arizona, produced by an unstable shock wave. The instability causes a low-pressure zone on the face of the separation bubble that will eat away a hole, like this one. I have highlighted the face of an unstable separation bubble, shown from a wind tunnel, that shows the hole forming, as well as smaller harmonic tetrahedrons. The entire shape of the shock wave is almost identical to this flat iron in Comb Ridge. Even geology of highest order strangeness can be easily identified with shock waves. In Figure 19 are several examples of what I term saw blades. Also shown are Schlieren images of where in a shock wave saw blades form, along the top of the separation bubble, highlighted in yellow among other features I've highlighted within the shock wave structure. Please take time to zoom into that shock wave structure and look at where the saw blades appear. They're very tiny in the image. In the turbulent backdraft of a supersonic shock wave, horizontal tornadoes also form. Figure 20 highlights these rotating winds and shows examples of the result when such winds are composed of dusty plasma. Dense dust rotating in the tornado that connected to ground electrostatically adhered, freezing in place while ungrounded plasma remained suspended in the wind and blew away, leaving half or a quarter of a petrified tornado. And again, you'll want to zoom in on the shockwave wind tunnel image to see where these interference patterns form the tornadic winds. Consensus explanations require this rock to bend into a jelly roll deep underground by some unknown process, and then rise to the surface by another unknown process, plus a few million years of unknown things happening that cause half the jelly roll to disappear. None of their processes can be demonstrated, but they give it a name anyway to make it sound real. Tectonics. Our explanation is a two-step process with electric wind and dust and can be reproduced. The process is already used every day in manufacturing. How wind-borne dust was compacted and seemingly flash frozen into place tells us it had to be electric. Only a dusty plasma could be so thick and still act as a fluid. Only ionic matter and charge-bearing dust could instantly recombine and chemically bond a crystalline form in situ in this manner. It just stretches the imagination to consider entire mountains being blown into place and almost instantly formed like they were made of whipped cream. But that is exactly what electricity and a dusty plasma can do. Scientists sorely need to be challenged to rethink everything that they've done in the past century. Gravity has trapped theoretical science inside a black hole, looking for dark matter, dark energy, unicorns, and multiverses, all in the wrong dimensions. Science needs to study nature as it's actually experienced instead of moving space and time to suit the scientist's career path. Thunderbolts.info has dozens of articles and videos explaining how geologic phenomena like flat irons, craters, canyons, and mountains were formed by Earth's electric circuitry and plasma winds. We show how the winds of Jupiter are a living example of it happening. It comes down to recognizing the fractal patterns of charge diffusion on a spherical capacitor, because it's the electric field of a spherical capacitor that shapes the wind. On a side note, it's how the weather can be, and perhaps is, manipulated electrically. In his video, Myron elicits the rhythms of nature as a cause of repeating harmonic forms, like sheep mountain spins. Rhythms of nature is a poetic observation, not an explanation. Consensus science is full of these. The butterfly effect, billions and billions of years, singularity, infinity, duality, monopole, black hole, wormhole, and space-time. It's all a load of crap. The electric universe is about finding answers to the greatest mysteries in nature. One has to start by asking the right questions. Materialism in science leads to the wrong questions because they are predicated on the wrong theories. Energy, frequency, and vibration, my friends. Energy makes the hologram. Matter doesn't matter. It's just energy having a rest inside its own magnetic nest.